Alright, listen up. Because Rick Ross just walked himself into the most humiliating first week of his entire career, and the one person he should have kept quiet about, 50 Cent, is currently doing a victory lap on Instagram that is genuinely, historically, catastrophically brutal. This is not a small stumble. This is not a bad week at the office. This is a full-scale public execution of Rick Ross's carefully constructed boss image, and the man holding the smoking gun is a rapper Rick Ross has been losing to for almost 2 straight decades. If you've been paying any kind of attention to the culture, you already know 50 Cent doesn't miss when he smells blood in the water. And right now, the water around Rick Ross is a red so deep it's practically maroon. So sit back. Because what happened this week to the self-proclaimed biggest boss in the game is the kind of story hip-hop is going to be telling at cookouts for the next 10 years. Let me set the table. Rick Ross dropped his 12th studio album, Set in Stone. 12th. That is not a rookie number. That is the discography of an artist who is supposed to be a titan, a legend, a locked-in Hall of Fame lyricist with a machine behind him. And going into release week, Rosé was doing what Rosé always does. He was talking. He was posturing. He was going on podcasts and comparing himself to Drake in ways that made grown men in the industry roll their eyes so hard they saw the back of their own skulls. Rick Ross was telling anyone with a microphone that the streets were his, that the numbers were fake, that Drake wasn't on his level, and that the biggest boss was about to remind the game exactly who ran the block. And then the numbers came in. And the numbers, family, do not lie. Set in Stone is projected to move under 26,000 units in its opening week. 26,000. Debuting outside the top 20 of the Billboard 200. Outside the top 20. Let that sink in for a full second. This is a man who told the world he was better than Drake. This is a man who claimed the streets were his personal property. And the album he built to prove it can't even sneak into the top 20 of a chart that Drake has been living at the peak of for over a decade. When 50 Cent saw those numbers, the internet nearly caught fire. Because 50 Cent has been waiting on this exact moment for 17, 18 years. And when the door finally cracked open, 50 kicked it off the hinges. Roll the clip. You gotta hear this. Because before we even get to what 50 said, you have to understand the pattern. Rick Ross has been on a warpath. He's been going after Drake, he's been going after 50, he's been going after anyone he perceives as a threat to his fading relevance. On one of the recent press stops, Rick Ross sat down and openly clowned 50 Cent's baby mother, Daphne Joy, a woman whose name has been dragged through federal court filings this year in ways nobody wanted to see. Ross laughed about it. He egged it on. He and Dion Cole were sitting there swapping alleged stories, and Ross was smiling the entire time like he had just won the lottery. That, right there, was the trigger. Because if there is one universal rule in the culture, it is this: you do not, under any circumstances, walk onto 50 Cent's front porch and knock on the door about his family. The graveyard behind that house is full. 50 responded exactly the way anyone who has watched hip-hop for 2 decades knew he would. He got on Instagram. And he did what only 50 Cent knows how to do. He didn't rap a verse. He didn't drop a diss track. He didn't call a press conference. He just posted. And what he posted turned the entire internet into one long comment section laughing at Rick Ross in real time. 50 wrote, and I'm quoting the man directly here, "I just saw your record sales, LOL. 2,000. WTF. 2,000 first day units." Then he kept going. So when your tickets don't sell and your album don't sell, what do? Promote car shows and sell chicken wings. Then he twisted the blade one more time. You had 20 features and it didn't help. Alright, now I'm going to pack it up. It's over, officer. Get your bum juice and your wings and get the EFF out of here. LOL. That is a public flogging. That is not a diss. That is an obituary written in real time by a man who has been sharpening the pen since 2007. Here's the part nobody's saying, though. Rick Ross should have seen this coming from a mile out. Because when Ross decided to take shots at Daphne Joy on that Dion Cole clip, he wasn't just running his mouth. He was writing his own eulogy in slow motion. Rosie knew exactly who he was poking. Ross has been in this war with 50 Cent since 2008. He knows Fifth's response time. He knows Curtis Jackson's playbook. And yet Ross still walked into the arena, took the swing, and then acted shocked when the counterpunch broke his jaw. That is not confidence. That is a special, elite, top-tier level of delusion, and honestly, you almost have to respect it. Almost. Look at the album itself. Set in Stone is loaded with features. Rich the Kid. YFN Lucci. Don Toliver. Big X the Plug. The Dream. Big Tony. Nino Breeze. Gucci Mane. Kodak Black. Young Miami. That is a Rolodex. That is a strategy. That is Rick Ross calling in every favor from every generational corner of the game to try and force this album into relevance. And it still couldn't push him past 26,000 units. The one song that people are actually reacting to is the YFN Lucci track, and the reason it works is because Lucci is carrying the entire first 3/4 of the song by himself. That is not a Rick Ross win. That is a Lucci rescue mission. And when you scroll the Spotify numbers, only 2 songs on the entire album have cleared 1 million plays. 2. Out of an entire track list. The one with T.I. is sitting at 1.8. The one with French Montana and Max B is at 4.4. And even at 4.4 million, those are not Drake numbers. Those are not even 2008 Drake numbers. Those are not even 2008 Drake B-side numbers. The math is embarrassing. See, and this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating, because the numbers expose the delusion. Rosie went on the record, on Aiden Ross's stream, no less, and told Aiden that his album was going to be, quote, a bomb. And by bomb, Rick Ross meant explosion, culture shifting, planet cracking. Instead, the only thing that exploded was the punchline. Because the Aiden Ross moment itself is such a perfect microcosm of what is happening to Rick Ross right now. This is a hip-hop legend, a man who was once shoulder to shoulder with the biggest artists on the planet, showing up on a young streamer's channel to plug an album, and the streamer had to gently remind him that the streaming numbers don't work the way Rick Ross apparently thinks they do. The subtext of that entire interview was Aiden Ross politely trying to tell the boss that the boss has lost the plot. And Rick Ross didn't hear it. He couldn't hear it. Because when you are that deep in your own mythology, the outside world sounds like static. Rosie's defense has been the streets. That is what he keeps saying. The streets. The streets are his. The streets don't lie. The streets are what matter. Well, family, the streets are speaking, and the streets are saying they are not buying Rick Ross's 12th album. Either the streets are dead, which they are not, or the streets have simply moved on. Both of those possibilities are catastrophic for the Rick Ross brand, because the entire Rick Ross brand is built on being the voice of that particular street. If the streets don't want the album, the boss doesn't have a title anymore. He is just a rapper with a boat, a beard, and a fading catalog. Wait, because it gets darker. Because 50 Cent isn't the only place this humiliation is coming from. The Drake situation is haunting Rick Ross in ways he still cannot escape. For the last few months, Rosie has been on this bizarre one-man crusade against Drake. He has been calling Drake, BBL Drizzy. He has been mocking Drake's albums. He has been implying Drake is fake, soft, corporate, done. And nobody in the culture has been able to figure out why. Because if you go back through the receipts, Rick Ross and Drake made some of the biggest songs of the last decade together. Aston Martin Music. Stay Schemin'. Diced Pineapples. Lord Knows. These are not casual features. These are anthems. These are the kinds of songs that put Rick Ross on radio for years. So why is Rosary suddenly acting like Drake owes him an apology? Nobody knows. Rick Ross won't say. And that silence, that specific silence, is the loudest thing in the entire feud. Then Drake did what Drake does. He dropped a line on Iceman, on the track Whisper My Name, where he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, if he's lying about flying economy, he bets he knows who he sees down there. And the entire internet, in unison, turned to Rick Ross. Because a video had just surfaced of Rosary sitting in what looked like a regular airport gate, in what looked like a regular airport chair, not a private terminal, not a jet lounge, just, sitting there. Like a civilian. Like any of us. And Drake, without even naming Rick Ross, managed to put Rick Ross in a headlock in the eyes of the entire hip-hop world. The lyric fit too clean. It landed too well. And when Rosary tried to defend himself, he made it worse. He said his jet was in the shop. He said it was getting Starlink installed. He said he chose to fly commercial that day. He said he flew first class with a female companion. He said, and I want you to actually picture this, that whoever filmed him sleeping in that terminal, quote, could have shot a rap video. That was his defense. That the paparazzi didn't get creative enough. That the humiliation was actually just a missed music video opportunity. This is the level of denial we are dealing with. Here's the thing that gets me, though. Rick Ross keeps saying he wishes Drake the best. He keeps saying keep winning, keep doing you, no love lost, business is business. And then 2 hours, this is a story Rick Ross does not want anyone to bring back up, and I'm bringing it back up. Rosary went to Toronto. He went to Drake City. He went to Drake's own festival. And he got pressed. He got confronted. There are reports, and I want to be careful here, that Rick Ross got physically ran out of that venue. And 50 Cent, ever the professional agitator, jumped on Instagram immediately and roasted Rick Ross's bodyguards. Fiv said all of Rosary's bodyguards needed to resign because they failed the single most important job in security, which is to guard bodies. Fiv said something wasn't right. Fiv said something didn't add up. And the entire hip-hop internet had a field day. Because here is a man calling himself the American boss, walking into Canadian Drake territory, at a Drake festival, and getting handled. That story never left the culture. It just sat there, waiting to be pulled back out. And this week, with Set in Stone flopping, everyone pulled it back out at the same time. That's the game, and the game don't miss. Rosary built an empire on aesthetics. The Wingstop money. The Bel Air. The mansion. The champagne. The Miami Boss brand. And now every single pillar of that aesthetic is being cross-examined. The jet is a rental. The watch is a replica. The album is a flop. The features are a rescue. The tour is a car show. And the biggest boss title is being handed to somebody else in real time. That is not a bad week. That is a foundational collapse. Roll it back for a second. Because I want to remind you what 50 Cent did to Rick Ross the last time these two had a serious flare-up. This is important context. Because a lot of the young viewers watching this may not know how vicious the original 50 vs. Ross war actually was. In 2008, when the beef started, Rick Ross tried to go at 50 Cent. And 50 Cent did something that has never been topped in hip-hop feud history. He took Rick Ross's baby mother, the mother of one of Rosary's children, out shopping. On camera. And posted the entire day online. He filmed himself buying her handbags. He filmed himself buying her outfits. He filmed himself pushing a shopping cart with her through a store. He posted it on the internet, at a time when going viral was a much harder thing to do, and he broke Rick Ross's entire universe in a single afternoon. 50 Cent, Fifth, has never lost a hip-hop feud. Not one. He didn't lose to Ja Rule. He didn't lose to Fat Joe. He didn't lose to Cameron. He didn't lose to Game. He didn't lose to Rick Ross the first time. He didn't lose to Rick Ross the second time. He didn't lose to Rick Ross the third time. And now, in year 18 of the war, Fifth is not losing this one either. This is not a fair fight. This has never been a fair fight. Rick Ross keeps walking back into the ring because he believes his own mythology. And 50 Cent keeps knocking him out because Curtis Jackson is one of the sharpest tacticians the culture has ever produced. Here's the twist, though. Here's the thing that makes this Rick Ross moment different from every previous Rick Ross moment. This time, the numbers are backing 50 Cent up in a way they never have before. In previous rounds, Rosie could always fall back on the fact that his albums were selling. He could always say, well, my album debuted at number 1. He could always say, well, the streets don't care what 50 posts. But now the album isn't selling. Now the streets do care about what 50 posts. Now the receipts are on Rick Ross's chest, in bold, in 26,000 unit font. This is the first time in 17 years that 50 Cent has been able to say the numbers agree with him. And Fifth is not going to let that go. Not for 1 second. See, and this is where it gets darker. Because Rick Ross is not just fighting 50 Cent right now. He is not just fighting Drake right now. He is fighting the algorithm. He is fighting the streaming era itself. Because the streaming era does not reward legacy the way the album era did. In 2008, Rick Ross could drop an album and coast on his brand for a year. In 2026, if the first day numbers are 2,000, the algorithm forgets you exist by Wednesday. Rosie came up in a game that no longer exists. And instead of adjusting, he doubled down on the myth. He kept telling the world he was the boss. He kept comparing himself to Drake. He kept posturing. And the algorithm, which is a cold, indifferent, math-driven beast, just quietly stopped serving him to new listeners. That is what a projected 26,000 unit week actually means. It means the algorithm has moved on. Wait, I want to be honest here. Because I am not one of these commentators who just piles on. Rick Ross has moments on this album. The features work in flashes. The production is not the problem. The problem is not the songs. The problem is the story. Because when Rick Ross tells the world he is better than Drake, and then the numbers come in at less than 1% of a Drake first week, the songs stop being songs. They become evidence. Evidence against Rosie's own claims. And that is what nobody in hip-hop wants. To release an album that becomes evidence against them. That is what Set in Stone has become. Not a body of work. A body of proof. Proof that the boss title is no longer his to claim. Here is what I keep coming back to. Rick Ross had every opportunity to sidestep this beef with 50 Cent. Every single one. Rosie could have kept his mouth closed about Daphne Joy. Rick Ross could have kept his mouth closed about Drake. Ross could have released Set in Stone with grace, done a low-key press run, let the features sell themselves, and gone home to count his Wingstop money. Instead, Rick Ross walked into every microphone within a 2,000-mile radius and gave 50 Cent all the ammunition he could carry. That is not strategy. That is self-destruction with extra steps. And there is a version of this story where Rosie wakes up in 6 months, looks at what he did to himself, and realizes he handed 50 Cent the biggest win of their entire 18-year war on a silver plate, engraved, with a bow on top. Look at how Fifth is celebrating. He is not just posting the numbers. He is posting jokes. He is posting memes. He is posting comparisons. He is doing the entire late-night comedy routine, and Rick Ross is the joke. Fifth is calling Rick Ross, officer, a reference to the old corrections officer photos that have followed Rosie for his entire career, and Rick Ross cannot say anything back. Because to respond means to acknowledge the sales. And to acknowledge the sales means to admit the loss. And Rick Ross is philosophically incapable of admitting a loss. Which means Rosie is going to keep pretending the numbers are wrong, the streets are his, the boss title is intact, and the album is a bomb, while the entire hip-hop internet quietly documents the crater. Here's the thing about Daphne Joy that people are not talking about enough. When Rick Ross went at 50 Cent's baby mother, he did it during a specifically ugly news cycle for her. Daphne Joy had just been named in federal court documents connected to the Diddy investigation. A video allegedly surfaced. Her name was already trending for reasons no woman would ever want her name to trend. And Rosé saw all of that, and instead of stepping back, he stepped in. He grabbed the microphone and he made jokes. He and Dion Cole sat there laughing about a woman during the worst week of her adult life. That is the kind of move that used to work in 2010 hip-hop. In 2026, it lands very differently. It lands cruelly. It lands like bullying. And the culture noticed. Even the fans who cannot stand 50 Cent looked at Ross and said, that was too much. That crossed a line. And 50 Cent, who has been patiently waiting for exactly that miscalculation, cashed the check the moment Rosé signed it. Here is where I have to pause and give Rick Ross his flowers for one specific thing. Because credit is credit, and I want to be fair. Rosé is one of the most consistent trash talkers in hip-hop history. His level of confidence, delusion, aesthetic maintenance, and public-facing swagger is genuinely elite. Rick Ross has managed to convince the entire world that he lives in a mansion the size of a shopping mall, drinks nothing but champagne, and eats nothing but lobster. He has built a persona so strong that even when the receipts contradict it, casual fans still believe it. That is a real skill. That is world building. And world building is what carried Rosé for the first 10 years of his career. The problem is that world building only works if the world you are building is bigger than the receipts. And this week, the receipts got bigger than the world. And that is when a persona cracks. Now, family, I want you to think about something with me. Because this Rick Ross story is not just a Rick Ross story. This is a warning shot for every artist in his generation. Because the same forces that are dismantling Rosé right now are lining up behind every legacy rapper still active in the game. If Rick Ross, a man with 12 albums, 3 decades of relationships, a Rolodex full of superstars, and a marketing machine behind him, can flop this hard, then nobody is safe. Not Wayne. Not Ross's Miami peers. Not the guys from the mid-2000s who are still trying to headline arenas. Streaming does not care about your resume. Streaming cares about your right now. And Rick Ross's right now, unfortunately, is 2,000 first-day units and an Instagram roast session from his archenemy. 50 Cent, Fifth, Curtis, however you want to name him, is not going to let this end quickly. That is the piece Rosé does not seem to understand. When 50 Cent gets a foothold, 50 Cent does not stop. He is going to post about this album for the next 3 months. He is going to bring it up at every interview. He is going to reference it during the season finale of every show he produces. Fifth is going to make Set in Stone the most infamous flop of the decade, not because the album itself deserves that title, but because it gives him a permanent hammer to swing at Rick Ross. And Rosé knows this. Rosé knows exactly what 50 Cent is about to do with this. And he has no counter. He has no shield. He has no album strong enough to erase the number. He has no diss track sharp enough to redirect the conversation. He has nothing. Except his mythology. Which is, at this exact moment, evaporating in real time. Here's another wrinkle. The tour situation. Because Rick Ross has been positioning himself for a major tour cycle behind this album, and now that the album has flopped, the tour math gets rough. Arena tours are built on album momentum. If the album cannot break the top 20, the tour cannot sell out mid-tier rooms. And Fifth, knowing this, has been dropping little grenades on Instagram about ticket sales, about promoter conversations, about which cities are going to underperform. Whether Fifth has real intel or is just cooking with vibes, the perception damage is done. Promoters read Instagram. Bookers read Instagram. And when the biggest boss's biggest op is telling the world your tour won't sell, some rooms start to hesitate. That is 50 Cent playing chess while Rosie is still trying to figure out which square his king is on. Drake, meanwhile, has been mostly silent. And that silence, that specific silence, is doing more damage than any verse Drake could have recorded. Because Drake is watching this from a distance. Drake is letting 50 Cent do the wet work. Drake does not need to say a single word right now, because the numbers are saying everything for him. The sixth god is sitting on top of a mountain of streams, a full stadium tour, a fashion empire, and cultural dominance that Rosie has been trying to attack for months. And every time Rick Ross swings at Drake, Drake gets bigger. Every time Rosie says Drake is fake, Drake sells another million. That is the mathematics of trying to punch up when you have been out of shape for a decade. Here's what makes this specifically wild. Rick Ross had a real path out of this. Rosie could have taken the Aiden Ross moment and turned it into a viral marketing win. He could have leaned into the streamer generation. He could have let the young guys carry the campaign. Instead, he doubled down on comparisons to Drake, comparisons that were guaranteed to make him look worse. And that is the entire Rick Ross problem in a single sentence. Every time Rosie had a smart move available, he chose the loud move instead. And the loud move, in the streaming era, is almost always the wrong move. Loud gets you clipped. Loud gets you memed. Loud gets your baby mother's name pulled into a nasty comments section run by 50 Cent's team. Let me talk about the delusion for a second. Because I have never seen a rapper, not one, build a career on delusion this cleanly. Rick Ross has convinced himself that his catalog is comparable to Drake's. His catalog is not comparable to Drake's. Drake has moved multiple billion streams on individual tracks. Rosie has moved less than 5 million on his best song of this album cycle. Those numbers are not in the same universe. They are not in the same conversation. They are not even in the same industry. And yet Rick Ross keeps saying it, keeps posting it, keeps insisting on it. That is not confidence. That is a coping mechanism dressed up in a fur coat. Wait, because this is the part that will haunt Rick Ross forever. There is a clip from a recent interview where Rick Ross is asked directly whether he considers Drake to be on his level. And Rosie pauses. And then Rosie says, no. That the streams are fake. That Drake could not clear the situation up if the streets really respected him. That Drake is still suing the label. That Drake is still hiding. Every word of that came out of Rick Ross's mouth. And every word of it now reads like sabotage. Because within weeks of that interview, Rosie's own album has failed to clear 26,000 units. And Drake has continued to move like a stadium act. If Rosie wanted to write his own comedic obituary, he could not have written it better than the one he wrote on that podcast, with his own voice, in his own words. Here's the piece that hurts. And I want to say this with respect, because Rick Ross has made incredible music. Rosie's early catalog is untouchable. Port of Miami. Trilla. Deeper Than Rap. Teflon Don. These are classic albums. Rick Ross is a legitimate hip-hop institution. And that is what makes this collapse so painful to watch. Because we are not watching a bad rapper fail. We are watching a great rapper fumble the last act of his career. We are watching a legend forget that a legacy has to be defended in the present tense. Rosie had a chance to be the Miami elder statesman. The Rick Ross who blessed young careers, showed up on classic features, and reminded the culture what a boss sounds like. Instead, he chose the Rick Ross who compared himself to Drake, mocked 50 Cent's family, and posted paparazzi jets on Instagram. He chose the wrong Rick Ross. And now the wrong Rick Ross is the only Rick Ross the culture is seeing. Look at Fifth's timing. This is what nobody outside the industry understands about Curtis Jackson. 50 Cent is not just funny. 50 Cent is a strategic communicator on a Pentagon level. Fifth waited. He waited through the entire album cycle. He waited through the pre-release hype. He waited through the Aiden Ross moment. He waded through the Dion Cole clip. He let Rick Ross build the platform. He let Rosie stack all the fireworks in the middle of the room. And then, the second the first day numbers dropped, Fifth lit the match. That is not luck. That is warfare. And Rick Ross walked into it with a smile on his face because he genuinely thought this album was going to shift the culture. It did shift the culture. Just, not toward him. Rosie's team is scrambling. You can feel it. The interviews are getting weirder. The Instagram posts are getting more defensive. The podcast tour is dragging. Rick Ross is doing what a boss does when he knows the numbers are bad, he is trying to outwork the story. He is booking every appearance he can get. He is calling every friendly outlet. He is doing every favor. And it is not moving the needle. Because when 50 Cent has the internet in his pocket, nothing moves the needle back. Fifth is the internet's favorite bully, and Rosie is the internet's favorite target, and that combination is unbeatable for the person holding the microphone. Here's what the culture is really deciding this week. And this is important. The culture is deciding whether Rick Ross gets to keep the boss title going forward. That title is not automatic. Titles in hip-hop have to be defended. Every era. Every album. Every news cycle. If Rosie wants to keep being the biggest boss has to move like a boss. And a boss does not lose a Twitter beef to 50 Cent while his album is projected to move under 26,000 units. A boss does not get pressed at OVO Fest. A boss does not get photographed sleeping in an economy terminal. A boss does not have to defend his private jet on Instagram. A boss protects the title by not letting the title get questioned in the first place. And Rick Ross has spent the last month letting the title get questioned by every single person with a phone. Drop your verdict down below, I'm reading every one. Because I want to know where you stand. Do you think Rick Ross can recover from this? Do you think Set in Stone gets a second wind on streaming and quietly climbs? Do you think 50 Cent is finally satisfied, or is Fifth just getting started? Do you think Drake ever addresses this directly, or is Drake just going to keep counting money and let the biggest boss keep swinging at air? These are the questions the culture is asking right now. And you, sitting here with me right now, are part of the culture. So tell me what you see. Because I want to know if I am reading this right, or if there is a version of this Rick Ross story where the second half rewrites the first half. Here's the version where Rosie comes back. And I want to be fair to him, because I have been rough tonight. If Rick Ross drops the Drake comparisons, apologizes to Daphne Joy in a real way, releases a quiet loose track project that lets his rap show up without the marketing, and takes a full year off from feuding, Rosie could reset. He has the catalog. He has the voice. He has the recognition. There is a comeback path. It is narrow, but it exists. The problem is that everything we know about Rick Ross tells us he will not take that path. Because that path requires humility. And Rosie has spent 20 years training humility out of his personality. So the more likely path is that Rick Ross keeps swinging, keeps posting, keeps comparing himself to Drake, and keeps handing 50 Cent free content until the culture officially retires the boss title and hands it to somebody else. Who does the culture hand the boss title to next? That is the real question. Because, Biggest Boss is not just a Rick Ross nickname. It is a hip-hop archetype. Somebody always holds it. And if Rosie is losing his grip, somebody in the next generation is about to inherit it. Whether that is a Miami rapper, an Atlanta rapper, a New York rapper, or a producer who becomes a mogul, the throne does not stay empty. And in the moment Rick Ross's fingers finally slip, an entire generation is going to sprint for the crown. That is the real subplot of this Set in Stone flop. It is not just a bad album. It is a succession crisis. Here's the biggest thing, though. The thing that will define this whole cycle. 50 Cent has proven, one more time, that he understands the internet better than any rapper of his generation. Fifth was ahead of the beef game in 2003. Fifth was ahead of the mixtape game in 2005. Fifth was ahead of the reality TV game in 2010. Fifth was ahead of the streaming platform game in 2018. And now, in 2026, Fifth is ahead of the meme warfare game. Curtis Jackson is not aging. Curtis Jackson is upgrading. And every rapper who thinks they can beat 50 Cent in a war of public perception is walking into a fight that Fifth has been training for since before some of these artists could talk. Rick Ross is just the latest in a long line of casualties. And Rosé will not be the last. Now watch what happens next. Because there is a pattern to how 50 Cent finishes these beefs. Fifth doesn't just win. Fifth humiliates. Fifth memes. Fifth plays it back on television. Fifth references it in interviews 4 years later. Fifth brings it up when he presents at award shows. Fifth turns his opponent's worst moments into a permanent piece of pop culture furniture. Which means, 10 years from now, Rick Ross is still going to be answering questions about Set in Stone. He is going to be sitting on a podcast in 2036, being asked by a young host about the projected 26,000 units, and he is going to have to force a smile and say something like, "We bounced back." He is going to be haunted by this week for the rest of his career. That is the price of underestimating Fifth. Here's the final wrinkle. And this one is going to sting Rosé the most, I think. Because in the middle of all this, T.I. and Rick Ross were spotted together publicly declaring, no love for the other side. And that other side is 50 Cent. Which means Rosé is now, effectively, forming a coalition against Fifth. Which is precisely the kind of move that makes 50 Cent's job easier. Because Fifth does not just beat one opponent at a time. Fifth specializes in beating coalitions. Every time rappers band together against 50 Cent, Fifth picks them off one by one, then makes them all look silly for teaming up in the first place. Rick Ross is essentially handing Fifth a group project to grade. And Fifth is going to grade it in red ink. That's the tea. Stay locked in, this one ain't over. Because Rick Ross is not going to go quietly. Rosé is going to fight. He is going to post. He is going to do more interviews. He is going to release a loose track diss. He might even reach out to Drake behind the scenes and try to make peace, which would be the greatest plot twist of 2026 hip-hop, and I would not put it past him. But whatever Rick Ross does next, 50 Cent is going to be waiting. Fifth is going to be watching. And every misstep Rosé makes from here on out is going to be printed, framed, and hung on the internet's wall forever. This is not a beef anymore. This is a museum. And Rick Ross is the exhibit. So tell me, honestly. Where do you fall? Are you Team 50 Cent, laughing at every post, cheering on the receipts? Are you Team Rick Ross, hoping the boss finds a comeback and shuts everybody up with a classic album? Are you Team Drake, quietly watching from the throne, wondering when Rosé is finally going to stop taking free shots at the Sixth God? Or are you like me, sitting back, watching the entire hip-hop generation of 2026 sort itself out in real time, one Instagram post at a time? Drop your verdict down below. Because I read every single one, and this comments section is about to be the most entertaining part of the entire story. Rick Ross versus 50 Cent versus Drake. The boss versus the general versus the king. And the numbers, family, do not lie. They never have. And they never will. Stay locked in. This one is far from over. And when the next chapter drops, and it will drop, probably tonight, probably tomorrow, probably by the time you finish watching this, you already know exactly where to come to hear about it first.